Ooga, fucking Ooga cunts, it's Schmeckle. It's been a bit, eh cunts? Not that you noticed, ya fucking inconsiderate bastards. You never call, you never write. Haven't even sent a fucking dick pic in months. Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, I finally got off my ass and recorded my first video of the year. It's gonna be a fun one too, cunts. Say hello to my pal Riley. Handsome cunt, isn't he? Fucking funny guy too. Honestly, you don't even need to listen to my parts. He's on a level of hilarity all his own. Not sure what the fuck else he's on. Now roll the shit!
In 2014, Laverne Cox said that misgendering trans people is an act of violence. Since then, she has repeated this statement multiple times, but some people still don't want to believe it.
Let me cut you off there, cunt. It isn't that people don't want to believe it, it's that people don't believe it. Because it isn't true. It's a small difference, but an important one.
So I thought I'd explain why intentionally misgendering trans people is an act of violence and why you shouldn't do it.
Gotta fucking stop you again. Don't you mean you're going to mansplain misgendering to us?
But to get started, we need some definitions. Misgendering is the act of referring to someone by the wrong gender or implying that they are a gender that they are not.
Which is a shitty fucking thing to do if you're talking to an actual transgender person. Or is that person of transitional gender? I can never fucking remember with you cunts. Semantics aside, this doesn't apply to people like yourself, Riley. You know, straight men with cocks who dress slightly feminine.
So if you call a boy she or refer to him as a girl, that's misgendering. You can misgender cis people or trans people, but it's particularly dehumanizing when done to trans people, and it's something that basically all trans people have to deal with at some point.
Again, Riley, are we talking about actual transgender people, or are we talking about people like you? Continually referring to a trans man or trans woman as the opposite gender obviously makes you a bit of a cunt. Calling a man with a penis who presents as a man with a penis and fucks women with vaginas who present as women with vaginas a straight man is just a fucking statement of fact.
Of course, there are times when people intentionally misgender feminine cis boys or masculine cis girls as a way of trying to reinforce arbitrary gender roles, and that's awful as well.
But let me guess, you're mainly going to be discussing misgendering towards trans people in this video.
But I'm mainly going to be discussing misgendering towards trans people in this video.
Fucking nailed it.
Violence is a harder thing to define. Several dictionaries say that it involves the use of physical force, including the Merriam-Webster and Oxford dictionaries. However, dictionaries are not intended as all-knowing, unchangeable rulebooks.
Yeah, fuck dictionaries.
They change and adapt over time as our usage changes. They are almost always descriptive rather than prescriptive nowadays.
Fair enough. So I suppose we should change the definitions of violence, gender, rape, sex, community, culture, male, female, harassment, assault, and racism because of the minority population that can't understand these words.
I would argue that their definition of violence is outdated and doesn't encompass all of the forms of violence we recognize today.
I would argue that the amount of people that recognize these things as violence is so small as to be insignificant in the evolution of a language.
And the World Health Organization agrees with me. In their 2002 World Report on Violence and Health, the WHO defined violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation.
I gotta stop you there, cunt. Fuck, I kinda wish I'd stopped you at the start. How fucking easy would that have been? I'd have been all like, Ooga, fucking Ooga cunts, it's Schmeckle. Today we're gonna... Oh, no, fuck it, it's Riley. Video over. That would have been fucking awesome. Would have played for a few laughs and I wouldn't have had to do this fucking video. Anyway, stopped you for a reason. You said that the World Health Organization agreed with you. Where exactly?
This definition is purposefully broad. The WHO recognizes in their report that violence is culturally influenced and varies widely across the globe. What some people see as violence, others may not. However, in an effort to fight violence worldwide, this is the definition that the WHO came up with, and it explicitly includes non-physical forms of violence.
No, cunt, it doesn't. The fucking thing starts with physical force or power. The inclusion of the modifier physical precludes the inclusion of the non-physical. Fucking Christ.
They say physical force or power, and they note that power isn't necessarily physical. It includes all types of societal power imbalances.
Jesus fucking Christ, you dumb, confused cunt. When they say physical force or power, they mean it much the same as if I were to say, I want a green dog or cat. I'm not asking for either a green dog or a cat of random color. I'm asking for a fucking green dog or a fucking green cat. Learn to read, cunt. Fuck.
Plus, their definition states that violence doesn't have to result in physical injury or death. Instead, it can result in psychological harm. Given that this is the definition that experts on the topic of violence have come up with, I would argue that it's a much better and more effective definition than the one currently listed in most dictionaries.
I don't know about you, but I tend to think the psychological harm portion of that definition was more aimed at things like torture than things like your chosen pronouns not being used. You know, since we're talking about violence.
Therefore, violence does include psychological violence, and misgendering a trans person is absolutely an act of psychological violence.
You keep saying this, cunt, but beyond a complete misrepresentation of a definition based on your apparent inability to understand basic grammar, you've offered no evidence.
If you still, for some reason, have a problem calling it violence, then call it aggression or abuse or whatever you want.
I call them words.
The point is, it's a bad thing that we shouldn't do.
I thought the point was that it was violence. And isn't pretending to be transgender, appropriating from real transgender people, if you will, also a bad thing that we shouldn't do? Isn't it, Riley?
Ask any trans person and they can tell you how awful being misgendered makes them feel. It's a way of invalidating their identity. It makes them feel disrespected, isolated, uncomfortable, and hated simply because of their gender. It tells them that they should hide who they really are, that people will never fully accept them.
And yet it still doesn't beat, bloody, or bruise them. We both agree that it's a shitty thing to do, misgendering an actual trans person. But that doesn't make it violence.
Misgendering a trans person causes real psychological harm. And not only that, but it contributes to physical harm too.
There we go. It almost sounded like you got it there. It contributes to physical harm. You're getting closer, Riley. Maybe there's hope for you after all.
Lots of factors contribute to the extraordinarily high rates of suicide among transgender people, but misgendering is definitely one of them.
Yes, I'm certain it is. And I bet you when Mikey down the road finally offs himself, he'll also be thinking about every slight, real or imagined, that he's ever experienced. Should we then decide that his boss was overly violent when he fired him for general uselessness? Or maybe it was the bank's vicious assault on him, demanding the money that he owed them. Or perhaps it was the pure, relentless, savage rape that his uncle inflicted on him when he fucking raped him. Bad example, that last one. The point is, just because it hurts somebody's feelings doesn't make it violence, even if the cunt ends up killing themselves.
According to the 2014 National Transgender Discrimination Survey, 4.6% of the US population reported that they have attempted suicide at some point in their life, while that number was about 41% for trans people.
Oh, surprise fucking surprise! I'm absolutely fucking shocked to hear that a segment of the population with a condition that's closely linked to clinical depression has a higher rate of suicide. Fucking blew me away, Riley. Dumb cunt.
However, studies show that having a supportive family, like people who don't misgender you, can greatly reduce that rate. The 2015 US transgender study found that the rate of suicide attempts for trans people with unsupported families was 54%. While it was 37% for those with supportive families.
You're on a fucking roll, Riley. Now show me the group of people, absolutely any fucking group of people, where the segment with the unsupportive families will be less likely to off themselves, and the segment with loads of familial support are offing themselves left and right. No? Can't think of one, eh? Then shut the fuck up unless you've got something relevant to add to the conversation. Jesus Christ, who invited this cunt?
Plus, misgendering contributes to a culture where violence against trans people is terrifyingly prevalent.
Trust me, cunt. Whether I call you a man, a woman, or just a fucking moron, the type of people who are gonna beat up a trans person for being transgender are still gonna do so.
A 2013 study by the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs found that trans people, and particularly trans women of color, were murdered at much higher rates than other LGBT+ people.
I suppose that means you've got nothing to worry about, eh, Riley? You're not trans or a woman of color. Or LGBT for that matter. You're fucking safe, cunt. Congratulations.
Misgendering may not cause someone to go out and murder a trans person, but it does contribute to a culture in which hating and disrespecting trans people is the norm.
I'd tend to say we're past the point where hating trans people was the norm. Hating people like yourself, who take legitimacy away from trans people by becoming cartoonish, flanderized imitations, well, that's a different thing altogether.
Which does allow some people to justify violence against trans people.
No, cunt, it allows nobody to justify anything. Violence can certainly be justified, against anybody, trans or non, but calling a trans woman a man doesn't justify anything except in the minds of people who would have tried to justify their actions regardless.
However you look at it, misgendering trans people causes real harm, and that applies to all trans people, not just the ones you like.
By that, do you mean that it applies to all trans people, even the ones that aren't trans at all? Like, say, yourself?
Because there are some not-so-great trans people in this world, just as there are some not-so-great cis people.
There are even some not-so-great cis people who pretend to be not-so-great trans people.
But everybody deserves to be gendered according to how they identify.
That's where you cunts seem to get it wrong. Every time. Transgender people suffer from a condition that causes them to feel as if their genitals do not match the gender with which they identify. This is a disconnect between their body and mind, with the science to back it up. Their problem is with their physical gender. People such as yourself do not have this disconnect, this innate issue with your physical body. Your issue is with gender roles. This is why transgender people transition, while people like you merely adopt some of the behaviors typical of the opposite gender. Theirs is a medical problem. Yours is identity politics.
If you misgender someone just because you disagree with them, you're basically telling all the trans people around you that their humanity is conditional, and that the second you don't agree with them, their identity goes back to being invalid.
Jesus fucking Christ, I pity the cunt whose identity's validity is left in my hands.
There are so many ways you can insult someone without disrespecting all trans people.
I'm well aware. Cunt.
And I know that sometimes you'll misgender someone unintentionally. Maybe you didn't know their pronouns, or you just made a mistake. That's fine. Just correct yourself, move on, and try not to do it again.
I never seem to have that problem. Usually when some cunt starts complaining about pronouns, that's the end of our interacting with each other. You're a special case, Justin. Riley. Whichever. Must be the hair.
You don't need to apologize profusely and make a huge deal out of it. That's probably drawing more unwanted attention to the situation anyway. But once you know someone's gender, if you continue to misgender them, that's when you get into violent territory.
Violent territory.
Yes, it can be tricky to switch over to new pronouns or a new name for someone, but if you respect them, or trans people at all, you need to do it.
And I do. When I'm talking to an actual trans person.
And all of this includes non-binary people. If someone asks you to use they, them pronouns, just do it.
No.
If you need help accepting the validity of these pronouns, I've made an entire video on the subject.
Oh, fucking goody.
But you should know that misgendering a non-binary person is just as hurtful as misgendering a binary trans person.
Only when the non-binary cunt is so involved in their own game of make-believe that they've bought into their own bullshit.
Non-binary identities are valid as well, and if you need help accepting that, I also have a video on that topic that will be linked down below.
Fucking goody a second time.
So, intentionally misgendering trans people is an act of violence.
No, cunt. It's not. Have you not been listening this whole time? Jesus fucking Christ. Fucking moron. Fuck!
It causes direct psychological harm and contributes to a culture where physical violence against trans people is commonplace.
And we already discussed how neither of those make it violence. Just fucking wrap this shit up, cunt.
The solution is easy. Just don't misgender people, and call out your friends or family if they misgender someone.
That's hardly my responsibility, cunt. Now I thought I told you to finish this shit and fuck off.
Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Now that's more fucking like it. And there we are. Finally done with that cunt. I'm sorry I brought him by, cunts. I really am. I saw the long hair, the makeup. To be quite honest, I thought he might be one of the cunts from Poison. I won't be making that mistake again. Fucking Christ. Anyway, as an apology for making you sit through that, here's something to cheer you up and help you put the bleach down.
Sound does a monkey make? You say Ooga?
And that's fucking it, cunts. Now fuck off!
Just do it.